Welcome to the Church of Peart with your host, Josh Reeves.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is episode number 2 of the Church of Peart. I'm your host, Josh Reeves. Thank you so much for being with me here for episode number 2 of this new show dedicated entirely to the man and the music. And I really need to explain something I didn't explain in episode number 1. But just in case there's any confusion or any people out there listening that may not get or understand that humor was and is a huge part of the world of Rush. They incorporated it in their stage show with their films that they played behind them live on stage. Rush always had a very healthy comedic sense, and in case there's anybody out there that doesn't get it, the name of this show, The Church of Peart, is intended to be tongue-in-cheek and a joke in the spirit of the comedy and the comedic elements of Rush. Because if you know anything about Neil Peart, the thing about Neil is that he wasn't a big fan of religion, as I'm not either. So and we all know how he felt about being deified and worshipped. He didn't like it at all. Made him uncomfortable. He just saw himself as a guy that was going to work and doing a job like anybody else. So that's the spirit behind the inspiration for the name of this show, The Church of Peart. Not that I'm attempting to deify Neil or, make him into a godlike saint post-mortem or anything. That's not what it is. It's intended to be tongue-in-cheek and funny, because the idea is that you would have a church dedicated to a guy who wasn't a fan of religion. I think even Neil, I don't know this for a fact, but I think maybe even Neil would think that's funny, especially if he knew it was a joke and it wasn't intended to be serious, and it isn't, But I just wanted to explain that. I didn't explain that in the first show, and I didn't want there to be any confusion as to why I did this, that I was being serious. No, it's not intended to be serious. It's not meant to be, we're going to worship Neil Peart and, sweet ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to, get into a preacher voice or something. We'll be reading from the book of Hemispheres, where our Lord and Savior Neil Peart did say. No, although that would be pretty damn funny if I did do it that way, right? It would still be pretty damn funny, but no, it's not intended to be a serious title. Rush fans, I think, get it and know, but there may be other people out there seeing this and going, why is he? This is blasphemous. He's making a church to this guy that was a rock musician, evil, devil-worshipping rock musician. Typical crap. But again, it's intended to be funny. It's intended to be humorous in the tradition of the spirit of comedic nature of Rush. They like to entertain people both with the music and, with comedy sometimes. Some of those videos and films they'd have behind them while they were performing was hilarious. But, yeah, there you go. That's what it's intended to be. So last week on the show, the first show, episode 1, I had mentioned that This show, episode 2, would be on the album Presto. And I actually called an audible and have decided not to start with Presto. I will be covering Rush's complete output throughout the tenure of this show. But instead of doing something like boring, like chronological, and starting out with the first self-titled Rush album and going all the way to the end, R40 or whatever, I decided to, instead of going that route, to make it more interesting, I decided to go in the order that I acquired all of Rush's output. To make it more interesting for me, to make it more interesting for you, to make it more personal and more interesting, and just not the standard thing. Because, again, that's in the spirit of Rush. Did Rush ever do anything that was the standard thing? Hell no. So why would I do a show in the spirit of the band and dedicate it to them and their work? Why would I do that? So instead of going in chronological order or something, here we go. This week, episode number 2, Moving Pictures. And I know, right? What else can be said about Moving Pictures at this point that hasn't already been said, right? Wrong. I'm going to tell you. Lots of things. So, episode number 2 of the Church of Peart is dedicated to Moving Pictures. And as I told you on the show last week on the episode 1, this for me, as it was for many Rush fans, this was my first foray into the band. Because for years and years and years, as a kid, I didn't even know this band was called Rush. Just as I told you last week, I found out about Rush. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I mean, it wasn't very long after Moving Pictures came out when I was watching the World Class Championship Wrestling promotion here in Dallas with my uncle. And we would watch the Von Erichs, and here's this guy who eventually became my favorite wrestler. I was never into wrestling later in life. I was never into WWE or WWF or any of that stuff. It was just a short time when that promotion was active here in Dallas, and it was shown on local stations and stuff that I was into it. But Kerry Von Erich was my favorite wrestler during that time, and his name at that time was the Modern Day Warrior, which of course comes from the lyric of Tom Sawyer. And he would come out, his walkout music was the song Tom Sawyer. But they never said, the announcers would never say on the show or on the broadcast, "Hey, this is Kerry Von Erich, the Modern Day Warrior, walking out to the song Rush by Rush, Tom Sawyer." They would never tell you what the walkout music was. And I told the story last week about how for years I was looking for anybody that knew the name of what I just simply called the Modern Day Warrior song, because that's all I had to go by. And so for me, this was my first foray into Rush, and I remember thinking at the time, my goodness, this is all I had heard up to that point. I was thinking, I couldn't wait. I was so excited to hear more of their music after I got Moving Pictures, because I was like, man, if any of their other stuff is this good, this might be the greatest band in the world of all time. Because Moving Pictures is just so monumental of an album. There's not a bad song on it. There's not a skippable song on it. There's not one where you go, I like this song more than that song. It's as close to a perfect record as a band can make. Really. It really is. But you know what's interesting? You'd be hard-pressed now to find anyone that would say anything critical about Moving Pictures, because it is so critically lauded and fan lauded and everything else. It's such a legendary piece of work at this point. But and I've gotten this from Rush fans I've talked to over the years. They're older than me. I've talked to them at shows, and one of my uncles by marriage was telling me this one time. A lot of people that weren't there, like myself, I was 5 years old in kindergarten, or about to be in kindergarten when this album came out. And what I've been told from Rush fans, people who were fans of Rush free moving pictures, is that at first, when moving pictures first came out in February 1981, there was actually a lot of backlash to this album by people who had been fans of Rush since the first self-titled debut album came out in 1974. I wouldn't say a lot, but from what I've been told, there was quite a bit of backlash from certain Rush fans because it was so different than their previous records and previous output that a lot of people viewed moving pictures as Rush selling out. Believe it or not. I know, it's crazy to think about that now, isn't it? But it's true. I've been told this by people who were around at the time. That Rush was considered, Moving Pictures was considered by many Rush fans at the time to be a sellout album. Because before, they had done thematic albums and, these long, intricate pieces like Hemisphere, Cygnus, all that stuff. And when Moving Pictures came out, that style of songwriting was gone, minus the song The Camera Eye, which is the longest track on the album. Many Rush fans at that time considered it to be a sellout album and considered it to be Rush going mainstream. Because before Moving Pictures, Rush was still a fringe rock act. They were not in the mainstream. They were more in the mainstream, and at least they were more in the known rock world than they were, say, previously to 2112. But 2112 was the album that gave them wide acceptance in the rock world, even though they were still a fringe cult band at that time. It's interesting how they were a fringe cult band for so long and then became a mainstream rock act with Moving Pictures, and then later on became a fringe cult act yet again. And then after they came out with the Lighted Stage documentary and were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then Neil passed and they broke up and all that. Now Rush they're back to their Moving Pictures level again. They're mainstream, and I would say Rush is bigger now than they ever have been. They're more accepted. I mean, I talked a little bit about my experiences last week on the first show, but man, there was a time when nothing was more uncool than saying you were a Rush fan. And I was around during those times. I was a Rush fan during those times. Let me tell you, man, if you came along as a Rush fan after those times, count yourself lucky. Because I remember the days, especially in the early 90s when I first started getting into the band, it was tough, man. I mean, you want to talk about ridicule and scorn and, all kinds of BS. Man, there was a time when you were afraid to tell someone you were a Rush fan. And it's so foreign now because Rush is so accepted into mainstream culture now that a lot of people forget that absolutely there was a time when it was the farthest thing from cool to be a Rush fan. And in fact, a lot of people were closet Rush fans. Yeah, can you believe that? It's true. There were a lot of people, and I knew some, that were Rush fans and would listen to them in secret, but they would never tell anyone they liked Rush. And in fact, if I spoke up and said, I was a Rush fan, and then I would get made fun of by this person, and I'd be sitting there going, "Hey, motherfucker, you're a Rush fan too. I don't think I didn't see the moving pictures cassette in your car. What are you doing?" Because a lot of people were in the closet Rush fans because they didn't want the ridicule and the scorn from people who didn't see them as, a heavy rock band in the same vein as, say, Metallica or Megadeth or Slayer or something, And so there was a period of time where, Rush was considered pussy music. Or it was associated with Star Trek nerds and D&D players and that kind of thing. I mean, really. It was tantamount to having a closet full of boarded comics. Having Rush albums in your collection was tantamount to having a pocket protector, a closet full of boarded comics, and the complete Star Trek television series on VHS. I mean, there was a time when being a Rush fan was considered as nerdy as being a Star Trek nerd or a Star Wars nerd or something. And I can't sit here and lie. I was into all those things. I never played D&D. I was that hardcore. No, I never played D&D, but I was a gamer, and I was into Star Wars, and I liked Star Trek. I was never a Trekkie, but I was definitely, a Star Wars fan, and I collected comic books, and it's funny how even all that stuff, nerd culture and whatnot, it has become accepted. And I really do think that the acceptance of Rush into the mainstream conversation has really, I really do think that a part of that and the reason for that has been because of the acceptance of nerd culture in society over the past decade and a half or so, where now it's okay. It's okay to be a nerd. It's okay to be a fan of pop culture and nerd culture and comics and Doctor Who and all this stuff. I mean, it was the same way back in the day. It was almost taboo. You almost didn't want someone to know you read comics or played D&D or something like that, or were a Star Trek fan because you were afraid of the ridicule. But over the last, 15 years or so, since the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I would say, it's interesting how the rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe coincided with the release of the Rush Allied Stage documentary and their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I think all of those things combining is what has led to there being more acceptance of Rush into the mainstream popular culture than there ever has been. But I gotta say, man, I'm kind of mad at some of these musicians, these famous musicians who will come out openly now and say what big Rush fans they were, because back in the 90s, when a lot of these bands like, Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, or Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails, you see those guys in the Rush documentary. But listen, those guys were for sure not coming out in the 1990s at the height of their success and careers saying they were Rush fans. They absolutely were not. And that kind of missed me a little bit. It really does. Because you'll come out and say you were a Rush fan now, like Dave Grohl, But when Nirvana was around, did you ever hear Dave Grohl ever once mutter the name Rush ever during that time? Absolutely not. I was around in those times. Absolutely not. Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor, the same thing. Billy Corgan, Smashing Pumpkins, same thing. In fact, I heard him tell a story about how when they were making the first Smashing Pumpkins album, the Gish album, that Billy Corgan and the drummer at the time, Jimmy Chamberlain, I heard Billy tell a story about how him and Jimmy were eating so much LSD during that time, they were just tripping out, and they drive in a van to rehearsals and to the recording studio to record Gish, and the whole time they're just eating acid and listening to Moving Pictures the whole time they're making Gish. And Gish is my favorite of all the Smashing Pumpkins albums. It always has been. I saw him on that tour. Saw him twice on that tour, actually. And those guys were not admitting that stuff back in the 1990s at the height of their fame, because it was not cool back then to admit you were a Rush fan yet. It would have done wonders for the band. That's what misses me about it, Had those guys spoken up back when they were at the height of their popularity in the 1990s, I think it could have sparked a renaissance for Rush a lot earlier than it did. And so now you'll hear people talk about being Rush fans, and they'll act like they're the biggest fans in the world, and you're just sitting there going, hey, fine, that's great, you're a fan. But how come you weren't bringing this up back in the 1990s at the height of your fame? Because it was not cool yet at all to admit it. And those guys were honestly afraid of losing fans if they admitted they were Rush fans back then, because literally that's how bad the climate was to be a Rush fan. I told you last week, I went to a punk rock show once, and I had to leave because guys were physically angry I had a Rush shirt on. It was just crazy to me. More than any other band that I've ever been into, I have to say, well, with the exception of Queen. When I was a teenager, man, first getting into rock music, it was very difficult to be a Rush fan or a Queen fan. You get called a homo a lot, that happened a lot, and happened many times to me. And then, these guys see me with one of the hot girlfriends I had back then. Oh, yeah, I'm a homo, huh? Yeah, what about this? Hickey's all over my neck. Fucking jamming Moving Pictures, But, really, it really was almost treacherous to be a fan of Rush and Queen back in the day, and especially Rush, with how nerd culture at that time was just not accepted at all. So I really think it's interesting, and I really think the acceptance of nerd culture in the mainstream is what has gotten Rush also their acceptance. And like I said before, before Moving Pictures, Rush was definitely still a fringe rock band. Of course, yes, they had a lot of fans, and yes, they were playing big places and selling records. But, previous to 2112, they were completely unknown. And then the record label was trying to get them to produce singles and commercial music, and they told them they would do that just so they could keep from being dropped from their record label. But, of course, they went and made 2112, and the rest is history. But with Moving Pictures is the album that took them from fringe rock group into the conversation of big, mega, arena rock band with mainstream audience acceptance. And what's fascinating about that is that with Moving Pictures, they did exactly what the record label wanted them to do when 2112 came out. It's so fascinating. Like, if you really look at it, all they did was delay what the record label wanted them to do during the era of 2112. The difference is they did it on their own terms. It wasn't the label telling them to do shorter songs and do less thematic songs and make us radio-friendly, accessible hit singles and stuff. That The record label wasn't telling them to do that, but it was on their own terms. They made the decision to start doing that after Hemispheres, because Hemispheres was such a grueling recording process for the band that they decided with Permanent Waves, really Permanent Waves, even before Moving Pictures, was really the first foray. And you got to remember, it came out just a year before Moving Pictures. So Permanent Waves really, and with the exception of the one song, Natural Science, on Permanent Waves, just like the one exception on Moving Pictures is Camera Eye. Really, Permanent Waves was their first attempt at doing shorter songs that weren't thematic and could be more accessible to a mainstream audience. People just weren't ready yet in 1980 for that change to occur. By 1981, music was starting to change so much with the new wave movement that was going on, and punk rock was winding down. Music was changing so much at that time that Rush, really, whether they intended to do it or not, capitalized on the changes that were happening in music and in the music world in general at that time. And they really caught the crest of a wave of people that were ready for that change in their music that they initiated first on the album Permanent Waves. People were ready by that time. And, boy, did they ever hit the mark. It's an amazing record because it is the culmination of a band that had been out there putting in work. I mean, to me, that's the testament of Moving Pictures, is that it is 100% the testament of a band that has been out there on the road, in the studio. These guys were touring. I mean, they were putting records out almost every single year. A lot of bands were doing that back then. They would go out on tour, they'd come home for like a month, they'd hit the studio again, new album would be out, they'd be on the road again. I mean, we got Permanent Waves in 1980, Moving Pictures in 1981, Exit Stage Left, the Signals album in 82. We got 4 monumental pieces of work starting in 1980 with Permanent Waves right on top of each other, and tours. I mean, it's unbelievable. It really is. But the testament of Moving Pictures to me, and it was their 8th studio album. To me, it's just the culmination of everything. Neil had become a master lyric writer, a master drummer. Alex had become a master at coming up with interesting guitar parts to fit the bass and drums. Not just standard guitar things. And he had an interesting, he come up with an interesting way to incorporate his style into the overall output of the band. And Geddy had become a technological master with the synthesizers and new technology that was coming out there. So everything was coming to a head. I gotta say, the one thing that I don't think Geddy Lee gets enough credit for is his unique ability to be able to take those complex, wordy, heady lyrics of Neil and transform them somehow into accessible, singable tunes. I gotta tell you, man, if you're not a musician, it's easy to overlook that. I am telling you, that is a unique skill set in and of itself. It's one thing to write your own lyrics and then sing them and put them to music and stuff and make it work. That's hard enough. But to take someone's lyrics that you didn't write, that you have no emotional connection to other than the emotion that the lyrics themselves convey, I'm telling you, that is an almost insurmountable task, and Geddy was the master of it. The master. You hear a lot about songwriting duos, Lennon McCartney, whoever, all the different songwriting duos. Who was the guy? Oh, Elton John, Bernie Taupin. You hear about these songwriting duos, but you never hear Geddy and Neil get put into that category of legendary songwriting duos, and I think they deserve to be. Absolutely, they deserve to be. Because that is a unique skill set to be good at. To be able to take someone else's heady, wordy lyrics and translate them into singable tunes, man, it's not easy at all to do. I mean, I can't imagine being a musician myself, multi-instrumentalist. I just can't imagine being in a situation as a singer and having some drummer bring me in the lyric sheet for a song like Between, Beneath, and Behind. Oh, my God, get the fuck out of here with that. Are you kidding me? What, I'm supposed to sing this? I mean, Geddy, just an absolute, I don't know what the word is. Just an absolute master at saying, okay, I need to change a little bit here, move this around here, maybe reword this a little. Let me know what you think, Neil. And Neil would either disprove or prove it. And then he would sing it. I'm telling you, it's a unique skill set that I don't think Geddy Lee gets enough credit for being the master of. I mean, he really is. And I think, again, he proved that, as he did on pretty much every album with Moving Pictures. I mean, even going back to 2112, I can't imagine somebody coming in with a lyric sheet for a song like The Temple of Syrinx and going, here you go, make this into a song. I mean, are you kidding me? I'm supposed to sing that? That reads like a freaking sci-fi novel. If you're expecting me to sing it, and Geddy just said, okay, took it and made it into a song. Oh, what a nice contented world, let the banners be unfurled. I mean, it's like putting marbles in your mouth. It really is sometimes. I mean, beneath, between, and behind. The fact that he was able to take those lyrics of Neil's and make them into the songs we know and love and sing them, it's a Herculean feat, man. And I don't think Geddy gets enough credit for that. So, Geddy, let me give you your credit, sir. You deserve big props and accolades for that, man. As a musician myself, I know that was not difficult to do, man. Thank you. Thank you for caring enough about the art you guys were producing at the time when you were producing it to put in that work of making those sometimes heady lyrics of Mr. Peart into these singable classics we all know and love. And Moving Pictures, very interesting thing about that album is that it was very much of the times. It's so weird because ever since I was, teenager, however old I was when I first got Moving Pictures, at that time, things were starting to move away from the video game arcade world that I grew up in as a kid in the early 80s and stuff, and it was moving more towards the next generation consoles and stuff that were coming out at the time. But I always associated the Moving Pictures album with video game arcades. And I think it must have been, I think I do recall hearing what I thought was just called the Modern Day Warrior song in a video game arcade back in the 80s. Maybe that was it, but I always associated that. And then they had, when Signals came out, they had the video for Subdivisions, and it actually did have a guy in the arcade playing the game Tempest. But really, Moving Pictures, to me, it sounds like what at that time was the quickly burgeoning future. You know what I mean? Digital technology and stuff was coming into vogue with, video games went from 8-bit for a long time to then 16-bit in the mid-'80s, you know. And recording technology was doing that same thing. Synthesizers were going from strictly analog to then digital synthesizers. And at first, there were analog synthesizers like the Roland Juno that were analog synths with digitally controlled oscillators. And, you know, it's very difficult, and I really hate the question when somebody says, when I tell someone I'm a Rush fan, oh, you're a Rush fan? What's your favorite album, man? I hate that boring, old, tired question. You know why? I mean, to me, take Hemispheres. I mean, you can even go back before that. You take 2112, Farewell to Kings, Hemispheres, Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, Signals, and then Grace Under Pressure. Those 7 albums, okay? You could go to a record bin that has those 7 albums in it, right? And you could close your eyes and put your finger on one of those albums. Okay, it doesn't even matter which one you end up putting your finger on. Guess what? Any one of those, whichever one you land on, that's my favorite album. Really. That's the way it is to me. Pick one. You know what I mean? Pick any one of those 7 albums from 2112 to Grace Under Pressure, and I mean, it could be my favorite. Any one of those. But just like in anything, really, for me, and I know a lot of people are like this, not everybody's like this, of course, but a lot of people share with me that thing where oftentimes, whether it's a movie or a TV show or an album, whatever it might be, the first thing you see or hear by a band or a director or whatever it may be, that oftentimes ends up being your favorite because that's the first thing you were exposed to. For instance, with me, Empire Strikes Back. That's always been my favorite Star Wars movie, and it always will be. Why is that? Because I was only a year old when the first Star Wars came out in the theater, right? But I was 4 when Empire Strikes Back came out, and my dad took me to the theater, and I remember everything, every detail about that day, how we went to the arcade beforehand, and how we went to the movie, and then we went and ate Mexican food. I mean, it was one of the best days of my life as a kid. I remember it so distinctly. And, for that reason, since it was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw, Empire Strikes Back has always been my favorite. Martin Scorsese movies. The first film I ever saw by Martin Scorsese was Goodfellas. So, of course, to this day, my favorite Martin Scorsese film is Goodfellas, even though You could argue he might have better films than that. But for me, that's always my favorite Scorsese movie, no matter what. And let me tell you something. Empire Strikes Back, Goodfellas, Moving Pictures. I mean, want to talk about movies I've watched and albums I've listened to more than any other. There you go. The only album I've probably ever listened to more than Moving Pictures lifetime is probably the second Queen album, Queen 2. I've listened to that album, oh God, thousands of times. Not exaggerating. It's just a feat of audio engineering, really. But Moving Pictures, as far as Rush albums go, definitely takes the crown for the album. I mean, I listen to it today, and it's just like watching Empire Strikes Back for me, or watching Goodfellas for me, or watching The Sopranos series again for me. No matter how many times I hear it or watch it, it's never old. Because it was, those things were done so well that they're always interesting and fun to watch, even on repeated viewings or listens. And that's what I think makes, one of the reasons it makes Moving Pictures the legendary, monumental piece of work that it is and is recognized as, and with good reason. Because there's so many interesting moments that you never get tired of hearing them, no matter how many times you hear them. I mean, that snarling, growling intro to Tom Sawyer, which, by the way, let's clear up another misconception. We'll do that a lot here on this show, as we did last week on the first episode when I was mentioning that, yes, his name is pronounced Peart, not Peart or Peart, Peart. Put that right to bed for good. In fact, we had a listener who said they got ridiculed for saying it as Peart. Well, you tell them to eat a dick, good sir, because you're correct. If you say it Peart, you're correct. But a big misconception is that sound, that synth sound at the intro of Tom Sawyer is strictly done on the Moog Taurus pedals. And here's what's interesting. You can get a pretty damn good approximation of the sound by just using Moog Taurus pedals. You can do it with, different synths and stuff. But here's the thing. It actually was not strictly done on the Moog Taurus pedals by themselves. Back in the pre-MIDI days, and if you don't know what MIDI is, M-I-D-I, it stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It allows you to connect various digital instruments together, like drum machines, bass synths, other synthesizers together, and to work in tandem together to control them. But back before MIDI, you had something called CV Gate. And what CV Gate was, it was a pre-MIDI analog version of what would later become MIDI that you could use to connect together analog devices to make them work. And so Getty had this, I think it was the Oberheim 4-voice synthesizer. You can see it in a lot of pictures. There's many, many pictures of Getty standing there, stage right, or maybe it was stage left. I guess it depends on, if you're standing on the stage, it would be stage left. So, yeah, stage left. And you see this huge, cabinet synthesizer thing. And those Oberheim 4 voices were modular synthesizers of the day. You would you could buy different modules, and basically you would get a cabinet that has the keyboard in it, but then you would buy the modules separately. They still make synthesizers in that vein to this day. And you would connect all the different modules together, and that's what Geddy Lee had. It was a Oberheim 4-voice. You can see it prominently in the Exit Stage Left home video. But here's what was interesting about Geddy's Oberheim 4-voice. The top segment, he actually had the top part of that synthesizer taken out. And you can see this again in Exit Stage Left, the home video. And he had his mini Moog installed. And there's another misconception. It's Moog, not Moog, no matter how many people tell you the otherwise, including Mr. Peart himself, who I heard in one of their videos, I think it was the Classic Albums video, say Moog instead of Moog. It's Moog. Even Bob Moog, the inventor of the Moog synthesizer himself, said it's not Moog, it's Moog. So there you go. Putting another misconception to rest. But that swirling intro to Tom Sawyer was not done strictly with the Moog bass pedals. It was CV gate connected to the Oberheim synthesizer, and then he would trigger the Oberheim with the Moog Taurus pedals through the CV gate interface, and that's how he would get the sound. Now, what I've never been able to put my finger on is he's strictly outputting the sound of the Oberheim, which is kind of the way I've heard Geddy kind of say it, he's never come right out and say exactly what he was doing. Or is he outputting the sound of both the Oberheim synthesizer and the output sound of the Moog Taurus pedals? I believe it's both. Only strictly because if you mess around with the Moog Taurus, I used to have a what it was called. I can't remember what it was called. Oh, I remember now. A Moog Minotaur, and it was like a rack mount modern recreation of the Taurus. It didn't have pedals or anything with it, but you could plug it into MIDI and trigger it with your keyboard. I didn't like it. I don't know. It didn't sound authentic to me. I got rid of it. However, you could get pretty darn close to the Tom Sawyer intro sound with it, but not exactly. And really, if you don't have the foot pedals to go with it to trigger it, what's the point anyway? You know what I mean? You might as well just do it on a keyboard. But yeah, Geddy has never really been crystal clear on that, and I don't know if he had the mini Moog that was in his rack for his Oberheim 4-voice CV gated into the other stuff as well, but I assume he did. Certainly live during the Permanent Waves era, he had a Oberheim sequencer, one of the first, maybe the first, I think it was the first analog sequencer that was made for analog synthesizers. And you can see it. There's a video out there of them doing Spirit of Radio during a sound check on the Permanent Waves tour. Man, I'll tell you, I don't know. It looked to me, that video, it looks like the Cotton Bowl here in Dallas, where they played at the Monsters of Rock concert on the Permanent Waves tour. But that's how they're doing that on Spirit Radio. That's the Oberheim 4 voice playing back the programmed sequencer sound of the Oberheim sequencer, which they would later do digitally, which is also what they would later do with the Taurus pedal sounds and different various sounds they would trigger on stage. Later on, they were no longer using actual Moog Taurus pedals on stage as they did for a long time. Eventually, they started using, like, I think they're Korg or one of those companies. They were using MIDI bass pedals that were hooked into samplers, and they would trigger the sample from the record of Tom Sawyer or whatever else they were playing, or that particular sound. The one other one that sticks out besides Tom Sawyer for me is the dun 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 on the dun 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 on the Villa Strangiato. That like 4-note pattern, that dun 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 dun, or 5-note pattern or whatever it is. That love that sound of the Moog Taurus on that. But my point is, if you hear that, you can see how that's a difference. That's just the straight Taurus sound, whereas the sound of the intro to Tom Sawyer with that spiraling, swirling sound, in my opinion, is a combination of the Oberheim and the Taurus together. And, listen, you guys know the songs on Moving Pictures. We don't necessarily have to go through every single song. I mean, come on, right? You know the Red Tom Sawyer's what it starts with, of course. I mean, is there a better album opener than Tom Sawyer? Maybe Welcome to the Jungle. I don't know. Red Barchetta. I mean, even though on this album they weren't really going for the sci-fi thing like they were with, say, 2112, or even Cygnus on A Farewell to Kings, or Hemispheres even. I once heard, I don't know if this is true, I heard one time that 2112, A Farewell to Kings, and Hemispheres were actually, as far as the story goes, are actually backwards. And that if you listen to those albums in reverse order, starting with Hemispheres, interesting that no matter what sequence you listen to them in, A Farewell to Kings is always the second one. So Hemispheres, and then A Farewell to Kings in 2112. I heard that if you listen to them in that order, that's actually the chronological order of the story. Whereas if you listen to them in the way that they were released, from 2112 to A Farewell to Kings to Hemispheres, actually you're going from the modern day of the story to the past, listening to them in the way they came out. So if you reverse the order they came out, so in that way, you're hearing the story from the beginning to the end. 2112 is actually the end of this story that begins with Hemispheres. Isn't that interesting? All a part of that. All part of that Peart magic, huh? And then, of course, YYZ. There's another misconception we're putting to bed. God dang it, we're putting all the misconceptions to bed in this one, aren't we? It's YYZ, people, not YYZ. Why? Because in Canada and Great Britain and stuff, they don't know what the fuck the letter Z is. They don't say Z. They say Z. The letter Z is not pronounced Z, it's pronounced Z. H-I-J-K-L-M-N-O-P Q-R-S-T-U-V-W-X-Y and Z. It's only us Yanks to say Z. So, listen, Canadians, Brits, go easy on us Yanks, okay? We know not what we do. We were taught that it was Z in public school, okay? So that's all we know. But I've had this argument with people. It's actually YYZ because in Britain, in Canada, in Australia, they don't have the letter Z, they have the letter Z. That's just the way it is. It's us Yanks in America who mess it up calling it YYZ. It's not YYZ, it's YYZ. God, I've had that argument before with people so many times. And the thing about YYZ is that an instrumental like that had never really been done in rock music before. There had been instrumentals and stuff, but not like that. And it started as just a bass and drum jam with Neil and Yeti just, wanting to jam and have a little fun. And then, of course, Limelight. And Limelight, I think, was the first Rush song that really had an emotional impact on me because when I was hearing it for the first time, a teenager, of course, when you're first starting out playing guitar or playing bass like I was before I moved to guitar, you have those dreams. That's the time in life when you have those kind of rock star dreams is when you're a teenager. And so to hear this song with these lyrics being sung about, I always got the sentiment of careful what you wish for, you just might get it from that song, because, listen, I don't care what Neil may have said later or, the way he had come to feel about it later. Listen, at one point, that guy did want to be a rock star, okay? He may have later, as I just mentioned, suffered from a case of careful what you wish for, you just might get it. But he, at one time, did want to be a rock star. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept going being in a band. You know what I mean? So he can sell that crap about, not wanting to be a rock star. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be good. I've heard Neil say that before. And yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I'm sure that was true. But let's not overlook the fact that, dude, come on. You also wanted the money and to be recognized as a great player. Otherwise, you wouldn't have kept trying to get good, But for me, Limelight, it was from the perspective of, man, here's a guy, that's lived it, man. And that's, of course, what the song is about. It's about the reconciliation of the dream of rock stardom versus the reality of rock stardom. They themselves have said that's what the song is about. And that is what struck me as a teenager first getting into Rush, was that it really spoke to me. It really made me, for the first time, think about that. Like, wow, man. I did never think about it before. I was like, wow. This is such a unique perspective because usually you only get the glorification of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. At least at that time, that's how it was. It was all about the glorification of getting the chicks and getting the money and rocking out and, rock and roll all night and party every day. There was never any focus or even mentioning of the slippery slope of careful what you wish for, you just might get it, and having to deal with the realities of what getting recognized everywhere you go and no longer being able to live a normal, anonymous life anymore is like. And to me, it's just such a, it's very much Neil, but it's also just a unique thing for someone to write a song about at a time when it hadn't even gotten as bad as it would get for Neil yet at that time. You know what I mean? It's on the album that would make him have those feelings of not wanting the adulation. It's so ironic because, before that, they were known, but already had enough fame even before moving pictures to make Neil already uncomfortable with the limelight. You know what I mean? So my goodness, you know he felt that way when he wrote the song already, even before they had achieved super mega mainstream success. My goodness, can you imagine the anxiety that guy must have been riddled with after the song where he writes that, I mean, after the album when he writes the song about the pitfalls of fame, they become, for a period of time, the biggest band on earth. I mean, I would argue that time period in 1981 when Moving Pictures came out and then subsequently Exit Stage left, there for about a year or so, they were the biggest band on earth, man. So you can imagine what Neil had to have felt like after that, you know? And that's the end of side A if you're listening on a cassette or a vinyl. You flip the vinyl over, and then the first song on side 2 is The Camera Eye. Now, The Camera Eye has always been a polarizing song because, at least in my experience, I found that a lot of Rush fans either love The Camera Eye or they hate The Camera Eye. And for the most part, most of the Rush fans I've met know, they like the song. I happen to love it. It's so... I mean, it was almost like Rush, I don't know this for a fact, but it's almost like there for Rush saying, okay, look, we gave you the shorter, accessible, radio-friendly songs on side 1, but just to let you know, just remind you that we haven't lost the ability to do these thematic long songs. Here's The Camera Eye, clocking in at 11 minutes and taking up most of the space on side 2. And what an amazing song. I mean, when they, for a long time, they refused to play The Camera Eye live and actually went on the record many times and said, we're never going to play that song again, ever. And then when the Time Machine Tour rolled around in 2010, and they played the Moving Pictures album in its entirety live, and they played that song. To me, that was, talk about the moment I was most looking for and my favorite moment of the Time Machine Tour. Without question, it was when they played The Camera Eye. Oh my God, that was the one song for me, above all others, that I had hoped I would one day get to hear live. And I mean, to say I lost my grease and came apart at the seams when they played that live is an understatement. And, yeah, they just performed it so well. It was just amazing to see how 20 years later or 30 years later, whatever it was at that time, 30 years later, those guys could play that in the year 2010 that well, having not ever played it outside of Moving Pictures live tour. And then Witch Hunt, which of course is such a great song. And interesting to me that I never viewed it as a teenager as a political song like I later did with songs like I mentioned last week on the show, the ones off of Power Windows, like Territories and the Manhattan Project. But really, and especially in the context of politics and stuff, you could, if you wanted to interpret, which I don't think it was intended to be political, but I think you could interpret it as such, and it wouldn't necessarily be a stretch. Because there are always witch hunts, And I think I don't know this for an absolute 100% fact. Maybe they talked about this somewhere. I don't know. But I think part of the motivation for Neil and those lyrics behind Witch Hunt is I think Neil felt like there was a bit of a witch hunt out for him at the time, because the Austin American-Statesman newspaper in Austin, Texas, wrote an article one time about Neil and called him a Satanist because they used the five-pointed star symbol in the album 2112. But dum-dums, if you actually would have bothered to listen to the album, hear what it's about, it's an album about, 2112 is about a guy finding this outlawed and banned thing, the guitar, and leading a revolution against a tyrannical government through music. And the five-pointed star symbol was the symbol of the Galactic Federation, or attention all planets of the Solar Federation, the Solar Federation. That's Neil's voice, by the way, in that. That five-pointed star symbol was not a pentagram, or intended to be a pentagram. It was the symbol of the attention all planets of the Solar Federation. The Solar Federation. The bad guys in the story 2112. So, I mean, these dumb Christian wackadoos at the time that were calling Neil a Satanist, if they would have just have bothered to listen to the lyrics of what he was saying, would have realized, well, you dum-dums, he's actually fitting right into your belief system. You're associating the five-point star with bad guys and Satan worshippers and stuff, right? Well, that's kind of what Neil's doing with 2112. He's using that five-pointed star as a symbol of the tyrannical, evil, advanced government that are enslaving people's hearts, bodies, and minds. Even the whole lyrics in 2112. I know it's most unusual, come before you so, but I found an ancient miracle I thought that you should know. That's what it's about. And then you hear Geddy's voice change, and he goes into that, loud banshee wail. As we know, it's nothing new. It's just a waste of time. That change and shift of the voice is a change in who's speaking. The other part, I know it's most unusual. That's the hero of the story. And then when it switches, that's the tyrannical Solar Federation, saying, oh, no, music, it's a waste of time. It's a relic of a bygone era. So that's what the whole five-pointed star was. Neil felt like they were on the media, especially in at that time, you wouldn't think it was now, or everything it was ever. You went to Austin now, but, during that time, it was considered Bible thumperish, and Texas in general was considered that. And they actually boycotted playing in Austin for many years until the very end of their career. Neil was still salty about it for that long. Which is interesting because towards the end of his life, he actually had a vacation home outside Austin on Lake Travis. How ironic is that? I guess he changed his tune on, because Austin later became not the Christian stronghold that it was during the time in which the Austin American-Statesman was writing those articles about Neil calling him a Satanist. So, I think Witch Hunt, along with Limelight, was really the most personally connected songs for Neil on Moving Pictures. Just like I was saying earlier, it's almost impossible. And I don't mind, but I almost don't like that old boring conversation of what's your favorite Rush album. You know what my second one is? What's your favorite Rush song? I mean, you know, it's like asking someone who has 5 kids what their favorite kid is. You know, how are you supposed to pick what your favorite kid is? You know, I mean, it's impossible. Like, you have cats. What's your favorite cat? Well, I mean, you know, obviously, if you're an animal lover, you're going to love them all, right? So that's the way it is for me. You know, I mean, I have, from time to time, narrowed it down to one. But even when I do that, then I think, what about, you know, because it's easy for me, really, just off the top of my head, first off, to say that my favorite Rush song of them all is Natural Science, off Permanent Waves. But then I go, what about Analog Kid, off Signals? That could be my favorite song too. So I don't even like playing that game, but as far as like what my favorite song on Moving Pictures is, and you know, again, how do you choose that on an album that's full of amazing songs? But for me, but just for me personally, oh my gosh, here it comes. And I'm going to get some crap and backlash for this, probably. Maybe not. I mean, Rush fans are all pretty cool, but you know, everybody's got their opinion, and everybody thinks theirs is right, and nobody wants to accept someone else's opinion. But for me, just me, personally, if I had to narrow it down to one for what I say was my favorite song on Moving Pictures, for me, it's the final track on side 2, Vital Signs. That's my favorite song. Now, I know, going to be a ton of people out there. What was it? Hey, listen, everybody's opinion's valid. Okay? Just don't give me grief because mine happens to be Vital Signs. I respect your opinion. Please respect mine. You know? Vital Signs to me, it's one of the songs I absolutely never get tired of. Never. I've never gotten tired of Vital Signs, and I love it so much. And to me, it's kind of the precursor to the next album, Signals. If I'm not, yeah, actually, what's interesting and ironic is that the word Signals actually appears in the song Vital Signs, but it's got that, again, there's that use of the sequencer like they used on Permanent Waves on Spirit of Radio. It's got that sequencer synthesizer intro. And, you know, they made that episode of the show Classic Albums, and that episode is a combo Rush episode of 2112 and Moving Pictures. But you know what? Dagnabbit, you know, always made me mad. They didn't cover Vital Signs in that Classic Albums show. And it's the one song, being that it's my favorite song on the album, that I would like to hear some, you know, inside baseball type stuff on. You know, and we just don't have, because I don't know this for a fact. I really don't. But based on what I do know about the band and what I know about the music industry and stuff, I think that Vital Signs was probably the last song they wrote for the album. And I'll tell you why I think that. Because oftentimes that's how it happens. Oftentimes the last song that you write when you're doing a writing session for an album ends up being the last song. But I don't think that Neil had that song pre-written prior to the recording of the album. I think it was probably a situation where, and again, this is just speculation on my part. I could be 100% wrong. Just want to say that first off. My speculation is that they had the album pretty much close to being done and realized they needed one more song. Or perhaps the record label said, that's good, we like what you're doing, but you guys really need one more song to round out side 2. Because you have 4 songs, Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, While I Said Limelight on side 1, and then side 2 has The Camera Eye, which is broken into 2 parts, New York and London, and then Witch Hunt. And right there, already, you're at 14 minutes. And a vinyl record in those days, it's about 20 minutes aside, 40, so about 40 minutes total, A and B. And I'll tell you why I think that was most likely not written by Neil in advance. It was most likely written in the studio as they were recording it. I'll tell you why that is. Because, and again, this is one of the things where I always talk about where, you know, a lot of people who aren't musicians don't get Rush and appreciate Rush in the same way that musicians do. You know? And you don't, listen, you don't have to be a musician to like Rush. I'm just saying that if you are, people who are musicians themselves tend to appreciate Rush in a different way than people who are not musicians. Because you know damn well what they're doing. You know how hard it is, you know. it's the opposite for me with someone like Frank Zappa, who I'm not a fan of. But I find the opposite's true with Frank Zappa. It's like people who aren't musicians like Frank Zappa, and people who are actual musicians aren't really Frank Zappa fans. You know, listen, I mean, Frank Zappa, I'm sorry, that's barely, there's nothing funnier to me than somebody that criticizes Rush. And believe me, I've heard that many times. Nothing funnier to me than somebody that criticizes Rush. I don't like Geddy's voice, this, that, the other, whatever. And let's see, if you don't like Geddy's voice, that's fine. You know, in the 70s, I understand it was a lot harder to tolerate when he was doing the Banshee wail era. But, you know, later the voice deepened and softened, and I mean, I think his voice is as good as anybody's from, like, Permanent Waves on, really. But I understand everybody has different tastes, but God, Frank Zappa, I mean, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, yeah, that's real genius there. Frank Zappa's barely music, okay? Real musicians, people who play music, they know that. Frank Zappa is barely music. That's not to say he didn't have some amazing musicians play with him through the years. People like Steve Vai and many others. But come on. Again, tunes, man, tunes. Just like I was saying with Dream Theater on the first episode of the show. Gotta have tunes, man. Okay? That crap Frank Zappa played was not tunes, alright? But it's interesting that I find that people who aren't musicians oftentimes aren't Rush fans, and people who are musicians oftentimes aren't Frank Zappa fans, and people who aren't musicians like Frank Zappa. It's interesting how that works. But back to Vital Signs, I really think that Vital Signs was written on the fly in the studio, and I'll tell you why. The lyrics. And if you don't know music gear, even if you are a musician, a lot of people don't know everything about music gear. I'm a music gear freak, so and I always have been. So that those lyrics in that song, if you don't know and don't understand those lyrics, there are things Neil is saying in the lyrics of that song that come directly from the function of what was at that time the newest recording and synthesizer technology. Pause, rewind, replay, warm memory chip. All that. Random sample, hold the one you need. Random sample, hold is a function on the synthesizers of the day. So what Neil was doing, random sample, hold the one you need. Leave out the friction. Fiction, the fact is, it's friction. Will only be won by persistence. He's taking the state of the human condition and the relationship and communication and whatnot between humans and individuals, and relating that to how recording equipment and gear and synthesizers and whatnot of the day were relating to each other then, which was through, like I said earlier, you had CV gate first and then later MIDI. But like I said, random sample, hold on, that's a warm memory chip. I mean, that's, you had, that was when the synthesizers, because the early analog synthesizers didn't have chips in them. They just had oscillators and, stuff like that. You couldn't, if you had a analog synthesizer like a Mini Moog or something, if you came up with a good patch, you better damn well write the settings down, because if a knob gets turned or something, but between the next time you play it, that sound that you liked is gone. Unless you can recreate it exactly again. It's very hard to do unless you have the exact settings down. But then later on, the synthesizers started to get memory chips in them. And so you could create the preset and then save it. That's what was interesting about the Moog Taurus pedals, the original ones. You couldn't save your own preset sounds, but they came with like 4 or 5, like tuba. One was just called Taurus. What the hell is the sound of a Taurus? The sound of a bull? Yeah, because it's pretty damn mean and growly. But yeah, in the early days, you couldn't save your presets. And then later on, when they got memory chips in them, you could create your own patch and then save that sound and bring it back up with memory. And a lot of the early memory had like watch batteries in them, which would corrode and rust over time. You had to take them apart and get them replaced and all that. But I even though I've never heard him talk about it, I have to think that that song, Vital Signs, was a result of Neil in the studio trying to come up with a song about the relationship between people, humans, and also how it relates to this similar sort of symbiotic and codependent relationship of music instrument and music gear. Pause, rewind, replay. I mean, what'd you do, Neil? Did you look down at the 24-track, Studer tape machine or whatever it was sitting there? You see pause, rewind, replays looking back at you? Did you look over at were you looking at the back of Getty's synthesizer, which was facing you, and see on the ports on the back, did you see that say random sample hold? That's what you would do. You could, it was before the days of actual sampling, which would come not too long after moving pictures came out, or you could sample an instrument and play it back, which certainly Rush did a lot of, and Neil did a lot of, especially with drum parts and stuff. And he had the MIDI marimba later, which people call the xylophone. Well, it was all done with sampled marimba sounds. And Neil, even on his, had stuff triggered to it that would cause his drum riser to rotate when he wanted it to, which I always thought was crazy. But if you listen to a song like the title track to the album Roll the Bones, there's a part in there, it's just a little stab, like bam, bam. It's an organ sound. And you go bam, 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 bam. Go out in the world and take our chances. That was a Hammond B3 part that Geddy played in the studio on that. Well, whenever you saw him play it live, of course, Geddy would never in a million years have a Hammond B3 on stage for one part, tiny part in one song. So what they would do is they had that part connected to one of Neil's pads on his MIDI marimba. And you can actually see this if you don't believe me, but I used to see him do it live. You can see on some of their home videos when they play Roll the Bones, he'll trigger that bam, bam, Hammond B3 organ part by hitting a pad on his MIDI marimba. Yeah, it's so interesting. And they do a lot of that in, on the song Time Stands Still. Alex would trigger the Amy Mann part, would be connected to a sampler, and the time stands still. You'd see Alex would hit a button on his keyboard and it would trigger that sound. It's totally genius how they figured out how to do that, how to be able to keep from having to have additional members to the band by making everybody else in the band pull more weight if they needed to, you know? It's so good. But Vital Signs definitely, to me, you know, with the synthesizer sounds and the lyrical content, and even the fact that he says signals get crossed and the balance distorted by external internal incoherence. That's, see, he's using balance distorted, all that. Those are all like audio recording terminology. You want to get the balance right when you're balancing out your tracks and mixing an album, and you don't want there to be crosstalk and interference and distortion. And he's relating that same thing to the relationship between people. To me, just as, you know, a music fan and a gear nut, I mean, that for me is why that's my favorite track on Moving Pictures. Absolutely. The final track, Vital Signs. And, you know, I've had Moving Pictures. I think I've had it in every format you could ever have it on, unless they ever made it on 8-track. I don't know if they did, but I never had it on 8-track. But I've had it in every other format, from CD to MP3. I still have the DVD audio version they came out with in the mid-2000s. To me, that's still the best sounding version. I haven't heard the Dolby Atmos mix yet because I don't have a Dolby Atmos compatible audio system. Although I do have it, the Dolby audio mix of it, because it comes in the Rush Moving Pictures 40th anniversary box set, which I got for Christmas last year, thanks to my family giving me Amazon gift cards for Christmas, because I would not have ever been able to buy that thing. I mean, it was close to $200. I think it's even gone up more than that now. Around Christmas, it was like, I don't know, 160 or something. I had a bunch of gift cards saved up, so I was able to get it. I got to tell you, man, I don't have any other box sets by any other bands. I have had some in the past. I had the Beach Boys Pet Sounds CD box set when it came out back in the 90s. Yeah, I had, I don't know, a few other. What was it I had on cassette back in the day? I can't remember. Back in the day, I had a box set on cassette. I can't remember what it was, Rod Stewart or something maybe. But anyway, the Rush Moving Pictures 40th anniversary box set, the deluxe version. Oh my God. Man, I knew if I didn't get that thing, I was going to regret it forever, and I just couldn't afford to buy it. So I was so grateful to give the gift cards for Christmas I got so I could combine them all and get that. Let me tell you something, folks. If you can afford to buy this thing and you're a fan of Rush and a fan of the album Moving Pictures, I'm telling you, get this thing while you can. I can't recommend it enough, especially if you're a fan of this album and it's your favorite Rush album of them all, as it is mine, even though, you know, that's really kind of dumb to say. But, like I said, I was saying earlier, you know, it's oftentimes the first thing you get into about a band, that's going to be it. That Super Deluxe box set, let me tell you something, and I'll put some pictures up here on the screen too, so you can see. Oh, man. That thing is the friggin' ultimate. Maybe you open it up and it's got like this folded packet of stuff that has all this cool stuff in it, like it's got a reproduction ticket of the Moving Pictures tour and a backstage pass and a luggage pass and all this stuff, recreation of the original. And then it's got this like a holographic lithograph of the album cover, and this is all, it's got posters, all kinds of nice posters you could have framed. And this is before you even get to the discs that are inside. Oh my God. And then you get to the discs that are inside. And it has, of course, before you get to the discs even, it's got a huge hardcover book. And even before you get to that, with the posters and stuff, it has a reproduction of the original tour book from the Moving Pictures tour. And I always loved tour books. To this day, I love tour books. If I go to see a show and a band's got a tour book, I'm buying it because I love tour books. I wish I still had all the ones I had from the early Rush shows I went to. I don't. I do have some of their more recent ones, Clockery Angels and stuff like that. But so it has a tour book. But then it has this hardcover book that has artwork that relates to Moving Pictures and pictures of the band live and stuff. And then when you get to the very back and the very end of the hardcover book, guess what's in the back? It's got a freaking page full of discs. Blu-ray. I think they're all Blu-ray. Maybe some are DVD, but it's got the Blu-ray audio version of Moving Pictures, complete with Atmos surround sound, Dolby mix, and one of the discs has new videos made for Moving Picture songs. It's just incredible. And then, yeah, we're not done yet. And then once you get through the hardcover book, underneath that, you get the brand new remix and remastered version of Moving Pictures. And I did an A-B comparison. I have a mint condition original Moving Pictures vinyl, and I did an A-B comparison with the vinyl remix, remaster, or not remix, but just remastered version that's in this box set. And here's the verdict. They both sound phenomenal. Surprise, surprise, right? They both sound phenomenal. Here's the difference in the remastered version, and it's also this exact same way with the new remastered version of Signals, which I don't have that box set, but they have a single disc, picture disc version you can get. And here's what they did that makes this new remastered version of Moving Pictures, which you can also get outside of just this big, massive, sprawling box set, in signal. I mean, in single disc form and stuff. Here's the difference. Okay, again, back to the stuff you would know if you weren't into music or music production or recording engineer and stuff like I am. The difference is back in 1981 when this album was made, recording consoles had what they had as far as equalization goes. You might have had 3 to 5, maybe a little bit more than that, forms of adjustment for each frequency, for each track you were using, but that was it. And so how mastering was done back in those days is bands would mix their albums. It would be mixed down, completed, and then a mastering engineer would take the final master tape and run it back through another smaller mixing board and then adjust the frequencies and everything to make them unified across the board and make everything sound equal to each other as far as each song, with the same volume and everything, right? Same loudness. But now with digital technology, you can take older recordings, and I've done this myself with older recordings that have never been remastered before. I've done it just for fun and stuff. I've done it with Rush bootlegs. You can find them on my YouTube channel here. I've got Power Windows Tour and All the Bones Tour and stuff up there, and I've got Counterparts Tour video and audio that I've done. It's the same thing. You can actually apply multi-band frequency processors that give you access to way more frequencies than were available in the pre-computer, pre-digital recording days in, say, 1981 when Moving Pictures was made. So now you can go back in and you can boost frequencies that you didn't have the ability to boost in 1981. So on the remastered Moving Pictures, and like I said, it's the same way on the new Signals one as well that I heard. Basically what they've done is they haven't mixed with the mixing or anything at all, which is good. Thank God they didn't, because the mix is perfect. But what they have done is they've gone back and they've boosted the overall frequencies of the album that you couldn't boost in 1981. And let me tell you, it sounds fantastic. But then again, the original album on vinyl sounds phenomenal too. But to me, they sound, I would say the new remastered version sounds marginally better. However, it does sound better. But, if you're still listening to your 1981 original Moving Pictures vinyl you've had for 42 years or whatever, and it still sounds great, hey, go with God. You know what I'm saying? No, and you don't want to get awarded by the new box. Hey, it's fine. But let me tell you, it does sound phenomenal. But that's not where it ends with this box set. Then once you get through the new remastered version of the album itself, then you get Rush Live in YYZ 1981, which is the first professionally non-bootleg released version, full show version of the Toronto show on the Moving Pictures tour. That's why it's called Live in YYZ. Whereas, Exit Stage Left was recorded in somewhere in England, and it was definitely manhandled by post-production to get it to sound that way. But this is a pure board recording. It's the only time they've ever released a full show of the Moving Picture Store. Because even Exit Stage Left is an edited version of the show. It's not the complete version. This has a 4-disc. It's 4 vinyls, folks. This box set has 4 vinyl collection. Rush and YYZ, 1981. You get a 4-disc live moving pictures tour collection in this box set. And to me, oh my God, it's the Holy Grail. It's the Holy Grail. Oh my God. I mean, the only thing that could have possibly topped that for me, and it's the reason why I will never buy the Signals box set that they just came out with, because with that, there isn't anything like this in that. And to me, that's the Grail. A full set list, full show release from the Signal store. But I don't think it exists, nor does any complete video from that era either, because I think what the thinking was, you got to remember, Signals came out just a year after Moving Pictures. Moving Pictures was the biggest thing they ever did. So they really documented the Moving Pictures tour with audio and, of course, film and the Exit Stage Left Home video and stuff. But I think the next year, since it was just a year after they'd done the Moving Pictures tour, they were like, look, we're not going to document this time. And then, of course, when Grace Under Pressure came out, they did document that. But, man, makes me sad there's not a Signals complete tour recording anywhere. That's the Holy Grail for me, always has been. But this is a close second. Oh, my goodness, man. To have a complete, officially released, not a bootleg, full show on 4 records, 4 LPs, folks. It's 4 LPs in this box set of, it comes with 5 LPs total. The Moving Pictures album, obviously, but then it's sprawling 4 LP Live in YYZ complete show from Moving Pictures tour. Oh, that's what's worth the price of admission alone. So then you get through that, right? And then you get to the bottom of this box set, and you think the fun's over? It's not. Then you get to the bottom, after all the discs and all the posters and then the books and tour books and all that stuff are out, you get to the bottom and guess what's waiting for you? Oh my gosh. There's something they call, it's a challenge coin. They used to give them to guys in the military, so guys couldn't do fake valor where, you know, they act like they're in the armed forces, but they aren't. So there's a coin with a Starman on it, nicely minted, amazing piece of artwork. And then there's 2 solid metal guitar picks you could never use with the guitar unless you like breaking strings. You could maybe use it for bass if you wanted a metallic type of sound. I used to do that. And each one of these one has Getty's signature printed on it and etched into it. The other has Alex's signature etched into it. A pair of Neil's actual signature drumsticks. Oh my gosh. And a model of the Ferrari Barchetta convertible Spider. And that's it. My goodness. After you get through all the amazing things in it, there's prizes for you in the bottom of the box. I mean, this is the most... I mean, Rush really... You can really see how they have always been about giving their fans the biggest bang for your buck that you could get. And I love that even though they don't own their catalog anymore and they sold it shortly before Neil passed away when they stopped touring after R40, that spirit of giving the fans their money's worth continues in this box set. Really makes me happy that they did this, and it's fantastic. I'm telling you, it's amazing. And it's got a model. It's mounted on a stand. And it says Rush Moving Pictures 40th Anniversary Red Barchetta. And it's a model of the actual car the song is written of, which was Neil's favorite car. In fact, he had 2 of them. I had to laugh when when I saw the auction photos when they were auctioning off his car collection after his death. And I knew about the Aston Martins, I mean, I don't even know how many Aston Martins he had, all silver. He had, I swear, I don't know this for a fact, it looked like he had an Aston Martin from every year from like the James Bond Aston Martin in 1964 to the modern day. I mean, he had at least, I don't know, he had like 30 silver Aston Martins or something. And of course, he had the red Barchetta, he had the actual, Ferrari Barchetta Spider convertible. But here's what made me laugh when I saw his collection. He also had a black Barchetta. Black Barchetta Spider too. Now, if you know anything, this is why it makes me laugh. If you know anything about Ferraris, you know that Ferrari never made a Barchetta Spider in black, especially in gloss black like Neil had. Neil obviously must have found a totaled one or something, had it restored and painted black. Cause I remember seeing that picture going, "Hey, never made a black Barchetta Spider." But Neil damn sure had one. He sure did. But this box set is definitely worth it. It's, in my opinion, the most deluxe box set any band has ever made. And it's absolutely a treat. Well, that's it, folks. That's it for episode number 2 of the Church of Peart. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I certainly did. I'm really enjoying the show. And next week, let me look at my list real quick. There it is. There's my list. Where'd it go? Next week will be Roll the Bones, because that's the second album I ever got by Rush. So the topic of next week's show will be Roll the Bones. Keep rocking, everybody. Keep listening to Rush. And keep the spirit alive, all right? Keep turning on new people. Keep it cranking. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Take care.